You could say, well, Gary, let's talk about Missouri, and it'd be like ask Alex Haley, who wrote Roots, tell me about your family. It would just never run out of information. So I think maybe, Gary, what we want to talk about is the Missouri you grew up in, how it's changed, and also how it impacted your life. So let's sort of start with that. Everybody on both sides of your family, and generally everybody you grew up around, was of some German, had a strong German background. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I didn't know anybody who wasn't German and Catholic. In fact, and I didn't know anybody who lived outside of Frankenstein, Missouri. And I didn't know why anyone would ever want to leave there. My paternal ancestors came from Germany in the 1840s. My mom's father didn't come until 1906 as a 21-year-old. It was a farming community of about 100 families. There was a big Catholic church, which is still there, a school. There were always about 100 kids in the school. Today, there are multiple communities combined, and I think there are 28 kids in 8 grades. So there's not much left there. There's no store. There was one store. There was one store, 2 stores actually, a general store and a smaller store, and one bar, which was right across the street from my house, which was very advantageous. I spent a lot of time. It wasn't a bar in the traditional sense. It was a community gathering place. It was a tavern. My good friend Tim Sampson, right here, who I've known, our parents lived in the same house together when we were infants. My parents and his parents were good friends, and his uncle ran the bar. We were 12 or 13 years old, and we were always in there playing pool. I mean, what else do you do in Frankenstein? And so one day, his uncle, Hubie, we're the only 2 people in the bar, and his uncle said, boys, I've got to go to town. Going to town meant going to Lynn, which was 9 miles away. He said, I got to go to town to the bank. Do you think you boys can run this place while I'm gone? 12. And we looked at him like, well, why would you even ask? Of course we can. This is not a problem. And so Tim and I took over the bar, and a couple of farmers came in to buy a beer. A beer was a quarter. And we could even make change. I mean, we had gone to the Catholic schools. So, and then some guy, I don't remember who it was, Tim, but somebody came in and asked for a hamburger. And Hubie had a hot plate in the kitchen behind the bar. And so we got a hamburger out and we fixed it. And the guy didn't complain. We charged him for it. But that was sort of my entrepreneurial beginnings of running a bar at the age of 12 in the metropolis of Frankenstein. Now, how many people can claim that?
So you're 12 years old, you're running a bar in Frankenstein, and your co-bartender is right here?
Right here.
A man you've never known. There you go. Well, but between you were 24. So, that could have been your defense. Well, maybe individually we're 12, but between us we're 24. Why did your parents live together?
I grew up, I was born, when my family, when my mother and father had me, we lived on a farm in the Chamois Bottom, about 10 miles north of Frankenstein. My father had just left the railroad. He was a World War II veteran, high school or elementary school education. Didn't want to work on the railroad anymore because it kept him away from the family. So he took a job as a farmer, a tenant farmer essentially. He was paid $100 a month with access to a butchering hog and a milk cow, a garden plot, and what was called a potato patch. And that was it. And we stayed there for 6 months or so until the Missouri River flooded. And my mom had one experience with the Missouri River flood and decided that was it. We would never go back. So we ended up going to Frankenstein because that's where my dad grew up. And when we first moved to town, housing is hard to find in Frankenstein. I mean, it's a pretty bustling place. And so Tim's parents were living in a house that his grandmother owned. And they lived on one floor and we lived on the other. And about 6 months to a year later, we moved into an old house to my dad's aunt. Her father was still alive, and my parents moved in to take care of him. And we stayed there for 20 years. And throughout that 20 years, we paid $6 a month rent for living in that house, which
Also, right down in the middle of the
it was about 100 yards from. We made a big move
from
from
Tim's
one
house.
side of the church to the other. Yeah.
Right, right. You know, we were talking the other day. You mentioned World War II and the impact on your family. I thought that was pretty interesting. Then Judge Limbaugh mentioned last night that your dad had a significant combat time in the Pacific part of the war. But talk a little about that and about your mother and.
Yeah, the war was always still very real to us. We grew up playing war. My sister, who's right here, I mean, I think back now, the Vietnam War is farther away from us than World War II was to me as a child. And my father had seen some really tough combat in New Guinea, especially. And he was a very devoted VFW guy. I don't think he ever missed a funeral in the county. And the war was still very real to us. My mom married her childhood sweetheart, not my dad, but a previous husband, when he was home from leave from the Army Air Corps in 1943. They got married, I think on a Thursday. They spent a 3-day honeymoon together, and she never saw him again. He went down in a plane 3 months later. No, I'm sorry, about 12 months later, a little more than 12 months later, 1 day short of their wedding anniversary. And she conceived a child over that short weekend marriage, my older sister, our older sister, who's now deceased. So her father knew that he had a child, but never saw that child. And after the war, my mom and dad had known each other. I mean, who didn't know everybody in Frankenstein? Yeah, in fact, my middle name is named for the first husband. They were friends, and in fact, we grew up calling my mom's first husband's siblings and parents, aunt and uncle, and grandpa and grandma. They were grandpa and grandma to us, just like they were to our older sister. I only knew one of my biological grandparents. Both my grandparents died before, or grandmothers died long before I was born. And my one grandfather on my dad's side died when I was 2, so I never knew him. The only grandparent I knew was a stern German immigrant who came here in 1906. And, what can I say? He wasn't the warmest, fuzziest grandfather. He lived up to the image of the stern German autocrat.
Did your dad talk about the war in terms of what he did during the war?
Very little. He was never comfortable. One of my most vivid memories of my dad is he had a desk that looked out over our garden. And I remember him looking out after a funeral and sitting at that desk and the tears rolling down from a veteran's funeral. I think it was a really horrible experience for him. And now, when he would threaten me on occasion when I didn't like something, he'd say, "You'll learn to like it in the Army." If I didn't eat the right foods or something, if I didn't want to eat something our mom had prepared, you'll eat that. You'll learn to eat that and like it in the Army. But fortunately, that never happened.
You know, that generation, for whatever reason, just generally talk about the war. I think that's not an unusual thing for just your dad. It's a generational thing that this is something that had to be done. You did it, and you didn't talk about it when you got back.
You know, that's exactly right. And I think in reality, my dad joined the Army. He was not drafted. He joined 6 months before Pearl Harbor. And he joined because it was the first time in his life. He was 26 years old. His fellow GIs called him the old man. But he joined because it was the first time he had a guaranteed income and health care, and it was just simply a matter of survival. He was living on a farm with his father, and it was just the best way to go. And I think it was just a practical decision.
And in many ways, Frankenstein and the farm community was in many ways almost cashless, right?
Yeah, you know, it's funny you mention that because when I was growing up, I could have, the majority of the people I knew made their entire living off the farm. The women did not work outside the home. I had 42 cousins. It helped that I had an uncle who had 15 kids, and his wife didn't work outside the home. But mostly it was a farming community where there were farmers whose wives cared for 8 or 9 children, and they survived off the farm. I would wager to bet, that's a redundancy, but I would wager that there's almost no one there left, maybe even the whole county, who lives solely off the farm. It's just fun. The economy's fundamentally changed since my childhood.
That farm life we were growing up, you know, people did a lot of canning. They had a big garden. We smokehouses. I don't know. We had smokehouses. My grandparents had smokehouses.
My mom's
And they weren't smokehouses like they have now. Actually, smokehouses where you cure meat, things like that. You know?
Yeah. My mom's goal was always to can 100 quarts of everything.
Of everything.
Of everything. Beans, corn, tomatoes, I mean, everything. The golden standard was 100 quarts. And if you couldn't hit that, you were a failure. Mm-hmm. And then we raised chickens. We ate chicken every day. Literally every day. And I still like fried chicken. I don't think there's another Frankenstein in the United States. There are a lot of stories about why it's named what it is, but the most generally accepted one is that the community had started down in a valley along a creek, and they wanted to move to the high ground, and there was a man named Franken who owned the land. They wanted to establish the church and the school, and it was very hilly and rocky, Franken's stone. And the name stuck, and it's still called that. They haven't changed the name, but it's a very different community than the one I grew up in. There's no store, there's nothing there except the Catholic Church, which my grandfather was the principal carpenter on, built in 1922. It's almost eerie. You can see this roof of this Romanesque church, red tile roof for 15 or 20 miles. And you get to town and you think, what in the hell is this big church doing here? Because there's nobody there. And the school is still there. It's still remarkable to me that they're able to retain the school.
Did you go to seminary, or did your parents send you to seminary?
No, my parents did not send me to the seminary. And I've thought about this a lot, and Tim and I have talked
You're
about it.
13 and you're going to the seminary.
13 years old going to the seminary. I'd never been away. Hell, I'd never been hardly out of Frankenstein. We went to Jeff City twice a year. Once to buy some school clothes that my mom didn't make, and once for Christmas presents. I think I was in high school before I wore a shirt that my mom didn't make. I'm not sure why we went to the seminary, but...
You're not sure why you went?
Why I went.
It's a big decision.
It was but we wanted to go. I wanted to go. I think to a great extent, we didn't know anybody who had an education, except the priest and the nuns. And they were role models for us in that regard. And I think that for some reason, I always thought I was going to go to college. I still wonder what I was really thinking, because that's, again, my parents hadn't even gone to high school.
And they didn't tell you were going to go to
No.
How was seminary different than living in your house at Frankenstein?
Well, for one thing, we had indoor plumbing. So that was a big deal. I'd never had a shower. God, that's embarrassing. I'd never had a shower until I went to the seminary because we didn't have a shower. But we didn't have running water. We didn't have indoor water.
Right.
We woke to the sound of a bell. We had what in Latin was referred to as the silencio grande, the grand silence. You couldn't speak after going to chapel at night until breakfast the next morning. Now imagine a bunch of adolescent boys in a dormitory being told they can't talk to each other. It was kind of ridiculous, but it was pretty harshly enforced. We had work routines we had to do. We went to school 6 days a week, even Saturday. It was a rigid, good education, a classical education, Latin, French, math I didn't like, still don't, but it was a really, really good education. But we couldn't leave the little campus there. Maybe once a month we would get.
There was where? I forgot that.
This was in Hannibal, Missouri, 245 North Leathering Avenue, St. Thomas Seminary. We would get town leave occasionally. And that meant you could go downtown and we'd go maybe to a movie or to the bowling alley. We got to go home for the first time 6 weeks after being there. And I was so damn homesick. And Tim, you remember, we didn't want to go back. We were, it was really, really hard. I'd never been, Tim and I, we did everything together. He stayed longer. He stayed 4 years. I stayed 2. But yeah, we were pretty much inseparable and have been for 77 years.
77. So it didn't take you as long as Tim to decide that this is not for me.
No, I finished my high school at Fatima High School in Westphalia. Played basketball and baseball.
Fatima church school, or is it?
No, it's not, but it's named for Fatima.
So I used to live by the bishop one day, and he was talking about he counted the schools they had, and then he said, of course, there's Fatima. The taxpayers pay it, but it's our school.
Yeah, I would say at least 99.9% of the students were Catholic. And even in the town we grew up. There was one African American in the entire county, in the Chamois area, who was the descendant of enslaved people. There were hundreds of African Americans there in the antebellum period, before the war. But by the time we were growing up, there weren't any. So when Brown versus Board of Education came, and integration was not an issue, except a Southern Baptist family moved to town and tried to send their little girl to Our Lady Help of Christians Catholic School. That was segregation. That was hard. And they didn't stay long.
Right.
Because I think, frankly, to our discredit, they knew they weren't particularly welcome.
So high school was okay?
High school was good. I thought high school was created for me to play organized sports. I didn't play very well, but I played basketball and I played baseball. And when I had time, I studied. But I didn't let it interfere with the basketball season or the baseball season.
So college, how did you decide to do that?
By the time I was a junior or senior in high school, I was a child of the 60s. I was going to save the world. And the only time a television was brought into Our Lady Help of Christians School was to hear John Kennedy's inaugural address in 1961. It was a big deal. He was a Catholic. And I still reread that address, and I'm moved by it to this day. And so I was going to be a social worker and save the world. And I went to Lincoln University because it was 30 miles away from my home, and it was the most affordable school of higher education in the state, intending to be a sociologist and a social worker. And while there were two major things going on in the world. Well, I think there were more than two, but what impacted me most was Vietnam and the civil rights movement. One of my closest friends is still missing in Vietnam. He's been missing since April of 1967. And then I could see on watching Walter Cronkite every night, I could see the cities burning, the mistreatment of African Americans in the Deep South. And I wanted to understand those two things. And so I began to read history on my own. And I got hooked on history as a way of understanding the world.
So you grow up with one black person in the town.
In the county, not in the
in
town.
the county, and go to Lincoln University, and before you know it, you're focused on black history.
Yeah, that didn't happen by accident, though. I took a black history course with my mentor, Lorenzo Johnston Green. I took the course as a sociology major because I wanted to understand why the cities were burning. And Lorenzo Green was the research assistant of the father of black history, Carter Woodson, only the second African American to get a PhD from Harvard. In Washington, D.C., Lorenzo Green was his research assistant in the late 1920s and early 30s. And he was a brilliant scholar. He was a gifted lecturer. I never heard anybody talk about history the way he did. And again, I got hooked. And I decided that I wanted to teach history. I wanted to be a historian. And I think what happened is I transferred my interest in working among marginalized people to simply trying to understand the history of marginalized people. And one of the great blessings of my life was working with and for Dr. Green. I was his research assistant for a number of years, and he and Tony Holland, who is here, and I co-authored a book in 1980 that we're now revising for the second time. That'll be out next year.
Yeah, I remember Dr. Green, whenever you and I started working together, we put him on our advisory committee, the Archives Advisory Committee, and I remember seeing him often. Great man, and obviously with the two of you, you could just tell there was a great bond of affection and appreciation for both of you. So you did that, then you graduated?
Yeah, I actually did. Yeah, I finished a master's.
The records would show that?
The records will indeed show that. I got an undergraduate degree in history. A Bachelor of Arts degree in history didn't get me much. And so I
had one of those too.
And so I decided I need to pursue a master's degree. Dr. Green was the interim head of the department, and the university got a large grant. This is in the days when there was a lot of grants for DEI, and the university got a grant to start an exploratory teaching program for inner city kids coming from Chicago and Gary, Indiana, and other places. And he hired me to teach in that. And I wasn't...
Those kids would come to Lincoln?
Pardon me?
Those kids would come to Lincoln?
Those kids would come to Lincoln, and they would be taught in this experimental program. I hadn't quite finished my master's degree, and so Dr. Green said, if you finish your master's degree over the summer, you can teach in that program. And that was my beginning. I was 23 years old and started teaching at Lincoln University in 1972. And part of that training was to go to Boston for the summer. I'd never been on a plane. I'd never seen the ocean. So it was, it was just one adventure after the other. I mean, from Hoovy's Tavern to Boston. Can you imagine?
Yes. So when did you decide to go to American University?
Okay. So
This is in Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C., that's where I did my PhD during Watergate.
So by then you're
I'm
mid-20s.
Mid-20s, yeah, but, 74.
Watergate was, you're right.
Yeah, I was 26 years old. Again, there was a lot of money available for federal programs, and there was a congressional act called the Education Professions Development Act, EPDA, which aimed at trying to get young faculty members teaching at HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, to do a PhD. Master's degree people get a PhD. So I applied for one of those, and I got it. And the next thing I knew, we were heading to Washington, D.C.
So you're a young faculty person at a historically black college. They accept you into this program at American University. When you got there, do you think they were surprised that you were?
I was there a couple of months, and finally the departmental secretary took me aside and said, I just can't stand it anymore. I got to tell you this. We all thought you were black. So I'm here to testify that Clarence Thomas and Gary Kremer are the two greatest beneficiaries of affirmative action.
And you're still for it?
And yeah.
I don't know. I'm just asking. Are you still for it? Clarence is not, right?
Clarence is not, but I am. And
you're there.
honestly,
As I recall, we talked about you were there. You got through this program pretty quickly.
it was the first time I'd gone to college without working.
So the program sustained you.
Yeah, I did all the coursework in 2 summers and 1 calendar year, and started taking comps. I had to go back to take comps, but so that took me a couple of years to finish. But I finished the PhD.
The coursework. So you.
But I did all the coursework while I was there.
You're in Washington, D.C. You're doing this work. You're finishing that work. Why did you come back to Missouri?
Because it's my home. There's no place. I actually was recruited to stay there. And I love D.C. You know, D.C.'s a great city. But my family was in Missouri. My roots were in Missouri. I'm a Missourian. I couldn't live anywhere else.
Need to get closer to Osage County again, right?
Yeah.
Parents are still living at this point.
At that point, they were both still living.
And you come back home.
Yeah.
And you're teaching at Lincoln.
Back at Lincoln. And I stayed there for 15 years. Until I came to the state archives to work with and for you.
So did coming to the state archives, did that expand your sense of Missouri history beyond where it had been before?
Yeah, I actually had not taught Missouri history in my 15-year tenure at Lincoln. I taught a number of things, mostly general courses, U.S. History Survey and that sort of thing, some specialty courses, but I didn't teach any Missouri history. I was interested in Missouri history. I was especially interested in the history of the penitentiary because while teaching at Lincoln, in those days in the 70s, Lincoln offered an Associate of Arts degree at the state penitentiary. And they looked for volunteers to teach there, and I volunteered to teach there. And part of that, I had just read a really great book by David Rothman called The Discovery of the Asylum, the foundation of the whole asylum and prison movement in the early 19th century. And so it seemed like a great opportunity to go there and understand that facility. But that was the extent of my interest in Missouri history. But when I went to the archives, the total focus, of course, was Missouri history. And we didn't, you may remember, well, I'm sure you remember, we didn't have much of a budget. We didn't have a travel budget. And the Missouri Humanities, then called the Missouri Humanities Council, started a program, a speakers bureau, which we still co-sponsor. This is in the late 80s. And so I joined the speakers bureau as a way of financing trips around the state. And I'd give 45 or 50 talks a year. Sometimes, I recall one speaking at a breakfast in Liberty, Missouri, and then speaking at a lunch in Diamond, Missouri, which was, a couple hundred miles away.
That expands, and then we had, all these, I mentioned to a group earlier today, we did something called Moments in Missouri History, where we, and of course, that was a public service announcement at the time, and television stations ran that, but always connected to some document at the archives, and I think they got a lot of attention.
They did.
A lot of use, but it was a great time, and maybe had some impact on getting you ready to come here. So you left that, went to William Woods for a few years.
Yeah, and honestly, part of the driving force there was I knew you were not going to stay in the Secretary of State's office. You were going to run for governor, and I didn't want to work for anybody else. And I really missed teaching. At that point in my life, I really missed it. And I had a good friend, Chuck Jones, who taught at William Woods. I ran into him at the Missouri Conference on History. He said, "How do you like the job?" I said, "It's a great job, but I miss teaching." He invited me to come teach a course one night a week. I did that for 2 years while I was working for you. I don't know if you knew that.
I did.
I was moonlighting. And then one night he called me and said, "I'm going to retire next year. Do you want my job?" And it coincided with your decision to run for governor, and so I went to teach at William Woods, and it was a great experience. It was an all-women's college at the time, and it then while I was there became a co-ed college. But it was a great experience, and I stayed there until coming here in 2004.
Let's talk about that as we begin to get toward a place to finish up here. So Larry Christensen and you had done some work together. Unbelievably great, good guy. We used him for a lot of things too as a sounding board. I think he reached out to you about this, or you reached out to him, but I know there was a decisive moment there where...
There's a little Mexican restaurant right across the street over here, and Chris took me to lunch there. And I was ambivalent about... I had tenure. I taught 2 classes a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I had a full summer off, and I had a month off at Christmas. And I was not quite real eager to jump into, a 40 or 50 or 60-hour week again. So Chris took me to lunch, knowing my ambivalence. And if those of you who knew Lawrence Christensen will be able to relate this story. Chris looked at me, he pounded on the table, and he said, "This is your patrimony." That's the word he used. "This is your patrimony. You must do this." Well, okay.
People don't use patrimony very often in a sentence, or any way.
Or anyway.
Or anyway. Well, it turned out he was right.
It's been a great experience. Chris will have been gone from us 10 years in April. I miss him. He was a long-time trustee of the State Historical Society. We wrote a book together. We edited a book together. I saw Chris, Lisa, who's here, my wife, sitting next to Tim. We went down. Chris had a rather rare illness, and they weren't sure how to treat it. He was weak. We took lunch down to them on a Monday to Rolla. And Chris was in his pajamas, and he was on oxygen. And Lisa and Max, his wife, went into the kitchen. And so Chris and I had a moment together. He was going to try to come back up here to the hospital the next day. And he said to me, "I hope I can get well. But if I can't, it's been a hell of a ride." And that's how I feel. It's been a hell of a ride.
that's a good place to stop.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all.